In this video, we're going to do a review on factoring. You did this in Algebra 1. Before we do that, I have this expression here, the quantity x minus 1 times the quantity x plus 3. And we're going to multiply this expression using the box method. Okay, so we're going to multiply this out, and I've created a box here. You take one of your terms, your factors, x minus 1, and you write that on the side of your box. You take your other factor, x plus 3, and you write that on the top of your box. This might start to look familiar. So to multiply this, we're going to multiply each row and column together to get each entry in each box. So here I'm going to multiply x times x, which is x squared. To get my term here, I'm going to do x times 3, which is 3x. Here I'm going to do negative 1 times x, which is negative 1x or negative x. And then here I'm going to do negative 1 times positive 3, which is negative 3. Now before I go to write my answer here, I'm going to ask myself if there are any like terms that I can combine. I notice I have two like terms here. They both have an x term, so I can add those together. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and write out my final answer. We usually write this in order from highest exponent to lowest. So this is equal to x squared plus negative 1x plus 3x is 2x minus 3. So both of these expressions are equivalent to each other. However, they're in different forms. Okay. So if I go and if I look at those again, what I started with, this is called factored form. Okay, you notice you got some parentheses. It's written as a product of factors. After we multiplied it, this is called expanded form. Okay. So when we practice factoring here, what we're doing is we're going from expanded form to factored form. That's what we're going to do when we are factoring. Okay, so we're going to be going backwards from what we just did. Okay. All right, so we're going to do some review here. First, you learned how to factor by looking for a greatest common factor, or the GCF. Remember, the greatest common factor is a factor that both of the largest factor that both of these terms have in common. So the first thing I do is I look at the numbers here. I'm asking myself, what's the greatest common factor of 2 and 20? And if you're not sure, remember, you could always write down the factors of 2 and 20. So for example, you've got 1 times 2. Those are the only factors of 2. And the factors of 20 would be 1 times 20, 2 times 10, 4 times 5. Now the greatest factor that they have in common is 2. Okay. So the greatest common factor, I'm just going to make a note here, the greatest common factor is 2. And then we also have to look at our variables. Okay. I have 3 n's here, right? N cubed is n times n times n. And I have 2 n's here. So the most that they have in common are 2. So they have an n squared that's in common. So the greatest common factor of 2n cubed minus and negative 20n squared is 2n squared. Once you've identified that greatest common factor, that's what you're going to factor out or divide out. Okay. So I'm going to divide out 2n squared from these terms. And then what's left over is going to be left inside parentheses here. So if I divide out 2n squared from 2n cubed, well, 2 divided by 2 is 1. I'm left with 1n left over. If I factor out a 2n squared from negative 20n squared, well, negative 20 divided by 2 leaves me with negative 10. And if I take out an n squared, I'm not left with any more n's. And so my final factored form, after factoring out the greatest common factor, is 2n squared times the quantity n minus 10. You could always double check your answer, right? If you use the distributive property and you multiplied that 2n squared back through, you should get what you started with, right? So 2n squared times n, that's 2n cubed. 2n squared minus 10, that's negative 20n squared. So you've done it correctly. All right, so we're going to keep working through our factoring here. If I look at this expression, there is no greatest common factor of these three terms other than 1. Okay? And so then you, in Algebra 1, worked on factoring using what might sound familiar. It's called the X-box method. And so we're going to practice doing that here. The first thing you want to do is identify A, B, and C. Remember, this is a quadratic, so you've got A, B, and C are used from your coefficients here. So A is equal to 1, B is equal to negative 9, and C is equal to 18. And so we're going to start by making an X here. Now, in this example, A is equal to 1. When A is equal to 1, we only need to do the X part of the X-box method. So we're going to review that here. In our X, the top of the X will be what we get when we do A times C. And then the bottom of our X will be what we get when we put B there. So A times C, 1 times 18 gets me 18. B is negative 9. And so here my job now is to figure out which two numbers multiply to get 18 and add to get negative 9. So if you can't do this in your head, you can always start with 18 and make a list of the factors of 18. 1 times 18, 2 times 9, 3 times 6. So you're looking, which of these pairs could we multiply to get 18 and add to get negative 9? Well, none of these will add to get negative 9 unless I make them negative, right? So negative 3 times negative 6 is still positive 18. But when I add them, I get negative 9. So negative 3 and negative 6 are two numbers that multiply to get positive 18 and add to get negative 9. And so from here, you're ready to write your factored form. You're going to use these two numbers to write our factors. And I can go right from here to my factors because A is equal to 1. And so factored form, I'm rewriting the expanded form as X minus 3. That's coming from this term here. And X minus 6. If you were to multiply this back through, you would, using the box method, you would get x squared minus 9x plus 18. This is our factored form. All right, so let's do one where A is not equal to 1. Okay, so in this case, A is equal to 15. Right? A is the number coefficient in front of your squared term, your squared variable. B is 4, and C is negative 4. I'm going to start out with my X here. So remember, A times C goes in the top and B goes in the bottom. 15 times negative 4 is negative 60, and B is 4. So I need two numbers to multiply to get negative 60, but add to get 4. I know one of my numbers is going to have to be negative, right? Because if I multiply them to get a negative number, one of them has to be negative. And they're going to add to get 4. So I'm thinking of negative 6 and positive 10, right? Negative 6 times 10 is negative 60. Negative 6 plus 10 is 4. Now, because A is not equal to 1, I can't just go ahead and write my factors like I did in this example. I have to do the box part of the X-box method. Okay. So this time we're not multiplying. We have our terms already. So the terms that we're going to write, they're going to go inside the box here. And so what we're going to do is in this first box, we're going to this form, and this term is going to go in the first box. So 15b squared will go in that first box. C will go in the last box here, so -4. But now, instead of writing 4b in the box, we're breaking up 4b into -6b and 10b. That's why we needed to do the x box, the x part of this. So I'm going to break this up. I'm going to put -6b here and 10b here. So now I'm ready to find my factors. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look in each row and column and factor out the greatest common factor. So I'm going to start with 15b squared and 10b. The greatest common factor of 15 and 10 is 5. That's the largest number that goes into 15 and 10 evenly. And they have 1b in common. So I'm going to factor out a 5b. Okay. From here I have -6b and -4. The largest number they have in common is a negative, see how they're both negative, 2. Right, I'm going to go to this column, 15b squared and -6b. The greatest common factor of 15 and -6 is +3, and they have 1b in common. 10b and -4, the greatest common factor there is 2. Now, if you want to double check your work, you should be able to multiply back through to get your terms inside. So 5b times 3b, 15b squared. Yep, good. -2 times 3b, -6b. Yep, good. 5b times 2 is 10b. -2 times 2 is -4. So now these are my factors in factored form. So my first factor is 5b minus 2, and my second factor is 3b plus 2.